So, hi everyone. I'm here with Rob Wiles today from Odigo, and Odigo are in the CCAS space, the contact center as a service space. So, Rob, thanks very much, and thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
So I'm quite interested, I suppose, because you're in this contact center as a service space. What are some of the trends that you've been seeing? It feels like that kind of space is transforming really over the last couple of years in terms of centralization. There's more, yeah, being able to do things sort of remotely, being able to do things using central services rather than like on-premise services. What are the changes that you guys have been seeing?
Yeah, I think you've done a good summary there, Chris. So certainly from our perspective, pre-COVID, it was all about transition to the cloud, moving that technology out of a customer's environment, giving that responsibility to a tried and tested vendor. Then during COVID, it was about having our agent community, our customer services community, working remotely because obviously they couldn't come into the office. So those were the two major shifts we saw over the last few years. But now we're back. Now we're back from COVID. People are coming back into the office or adopting hybrid working. There's a whole load of topics on the table for any organization that's involved in a customer journey or customer experience. And certainly from a collections perspective, what's driving that is actually a consumer or a business dynamic. And what I mean by that is everybody has more choice now. Everybody can look on their mobile for a different provider of the service or the product. And actually, I think from a collections point of view, it's when you get a client or a customer at the end successfully of a collections journey, how do you retain them as a customer? How do you not make that experience so terrible that they decide to go and spend their dollar elsewhere?
Yeah. How much do you think the pandemic in particular sort of really sort of supercharged the cloud-based services? And you mentioned it there. The fact that everything we were always concerned about security before, and there, everything was sort of on-prem because we could sort of like feel and touch it. I mean, do you think we'll ever go back there, or do you think it's now we're pretty much we're done? I mean, because there's economies of scale, I'd imagine, by having it sort of done centrally.
Yeah, it's done. In my opinion and our opinion, that that hybrid working is here to stay, without a shadow of a doubt. You'll bring your staff in for core activity review, training, skills analysis potentially, but their day-to-day work can be done from anywhere. And definitely cloud has helped drive that adoption.
Yeah, and as throughout the pandemic as well, we also had all these themes really around digital, different types of contact channels, and you've already mentioned it there. And like, how do people want to get hold of people? I mean, how much is that sort of that changing? I mean, is that sort of changing, continuing to change? Because when before we were very much sort of letters, telephony was very important. The collections
Yep.
world, it was inbound calls, outbound calls. There was some restrictions around that, but then we
Yep.
sort of got into SMSs. But it feels like that even that's sort of expanding even further now.
Oh, hugely. So voice is still the most commonly used channel across
Mm.
all demographics, all businesses. But digital certainly is being driven by that consumer desire for 24/7 access. We're now all very used to self-service, whether that be through a voice channel or a chatbot channel, doesn't matter. So that's driven adoption really well as well. But then you've also got core line of business applications, for example, Salesforce,
Mm.
that have now, their own digital channels to use in that customer journey. So when you have really big players like your CRM players coming into that space, there's obviously a market, there's obviously a need, and that's why they produce their technology to address it.
How do clients keep up with it? Because the proliferation of channels has been huge, right? And even if you look at what's on the horizon, where people are actually communicating versus the way businesses might communicate, it's Snapchat, it's other kinds of communication that happens, other kind of like messaging apps that kind of happen. WhatsApp is sort of on the cusp of it, but there's other ones
Yep.
out there as well. And it feels like it's constantly changing at the fringes, and businesses seem like sort of 5 years behind sometimes. I mean, how do we manage that? Because it becomes complex for businesses as well.
It absolutely does. So delivery of those services, if you're on a cloud type based platform, is easy to do. It's part of the feature set that most cloud providers have, including Odigo. So you would just go and select that from a menu of channels, set up that routing, set up that qualification, and away you go. The harder part is how you then integrate that into your business and your
Mm.
workflow with the least amount of risk. So I think the best strategy is keep it simple, find the channels that are relevant to the customer that you're dealing with. And collections is super specialized in that space. And look at the ways that they want to communicate with you that delivers the best outcome for your organization.
What are the best practices in terms of how to think about which channels to go after? I mean, is it still about channel, or is it really about customer preferences? I suppose would be the other way of looking at it.
It's customer choice, Chris. It's customer choice. Absolutely. And it's customer choice based upon what the transaction is coming in to ask about or query, or what that consumer or that business is looking for in terms of outcome. It has to be customer choice. It has to be driven that way, because I think there are plenty of organizations that believe they're communicating in the right way. But if they look at the results of their transactions or the cost of delivery of that service, it's not the most effective.
Yeah. How do you know if you're not delivering or communicating in the right way if you're not trying it? Do you have to try every single channel to know, actually, Snapchat should have been the best way for us to actually communicate with this segment? Because if you never use it, you never know to a certain extent.
I think the best way to look at it is look at your demographic of customer, whether it's business or whether it's consumer. Look at the way that demographic generally communicates, and then look at how you want to bring that into your customer journey. That's the starting point. So the indicators are in the demographic. How you then execute on that, you've got to look at the data that you can also make available depending on the channel. So we all know from right back in the day, a phone number, we can actually identify and collate a lot of data from a CRM system. Can you do the same with a Twitter handle? Probably not unless it's been pre-populated. So also look at the data sets you've got against the incoming channel or outgoing channel, because if you don't have the right information, when the agent takes that transaction, it's going to be a much more difficult job for them to do. It's certainly, again, you look at the collections industry, a priority has to be identifying vulnerable customers, because you're going to treat a vulnerable customer slightly differently to somebody like myself, wife, 2 kids, 2 dogs, who's got behind on his credit card bill. Okay, you're going to treat a vulnerable customer probably very differently to the way I would be treated. So match up data set along with a channel execution would be a really good starting point to get the most from it.
And I suppose you have this problem in collections as well, where you don't actually have good population of telephone numbers. So you might have got great population at acquisition, but that might have been 10 years ago, right? And when they didn't even have email or a Twitter handle or a TikTok ID or whatever it is. But we're now 10 years down the road, and we're now looking for all those things. And it's like, is it not across the whole of the journey where you've got to be asking the questions, how do you update it? All those. That's me talking as a collections guy at the back end saying, we've got to have this stuff, right? So
yeah. Part of the journey has to be qualification on who is contacting you, what information do we have about that person, so we can intelligently route the transaction. Okay. Now, whether that's the client, the consumer providing that information at the start of the transaction journey, or whether that's automating that from a CRM, making an intelligent decision on how you route, and then presenting that information to the agent, there's got to be a connection between the two anyway. Generally, that's where your data sits and your customer information sits.
And do you think that the lines between almost like departments or business lines are blurring a little bit? So we talked about 3 there. We talked about acquisition, we talked about like customer service or customer care, and then you got the collections piece as well. And the collections piece feels like that's sort of blending more into the customer care piece, and even on the upstream piece. We're almost like seeing it like the customer's the same all the way across rather than it being separate silos. Are you seeing that in your clients as well?
Yeah. So
thinking.
The workflows per department are different. The way you treat a transaction, the way you route it, the information that you want to show to your live agent handling it, or the way you want to automate the transaction is different because the workflows are different. But actually, from a customer's perspective, you want to create a personalized journey. You want to use the data you've got or have identified at the start of the transaction journey and then personalize it based upon what you know about that person or entity.
And we've got Consumer Duty coming up at the end of July, which is a big thing in the UK, and a big part of that and some of the conversations I've been having recently around this topic has been around evidencing. So how do you see sort of contact center systems in terms of playing that role in terms of evidencing, in terms of like contact activity, those kind of things? Is that coming up?
It comes up in every single deployment that we do as a business. So we target mid-market to large enterprises. Yes, within our product, we have a CRM light application that is able to provide that evidence of contact and provide data to the agent when they're on the transaction. But actually, the majority of our deployments skip that step and use the CRM system or the database that they use in their general line of business. And there's your evidential route. Our job as a technology provider is to automate as much of that data transfer as possible. So it's not just the voice recording. It could be sentiment about the call. How frustrated was the email? How frustrated was the SMS? Was there certain language used in the voice conversation? We need to take all of that data and move it to where the organization wants it so they can make the best data-driven decisions.
Are we capturing enough data through the process, or do you think there's more can be done? We talked about voice analytics there, or I suppose voice transcription. Yep. That's a new wave that's coming through, and this whole sort of complete analytics around qualities of calls and those kind of things. But are we capturing enough? Are we making enough use of the data?
There will always be different data points to take.
Yeah.
All right. What we've talked about there is text and voice. Okay. But we've now got clients that are doing video like we're doing now, and actually that's a really personalized experience for a consumer or an entity. You can see the whites of somebody's eyes. It's not just a voice on the end of a phone or somebody tapping away. You can see them typing. But then there will become all the data around the video, so undoubtedly it will go into facial recognition, it will go into expressions to gain sentiment alongside the voice. That is all to come down the line. But also, from that perspective, you could use this for identification purposes as well. ID and V, we call it. We love a good acronym in our industry. Yeah. But identity and verification, facial recognition is a very natural step for the contact center.
Yeah. Where do we go? Where do we go next from here? Do you think video is the next kind of step where we go? Because we've been through telephony, we've been going through, I suppose, messaging, two-way messaging. We should chat a little bit about chatbots and something like where we sit with that. I mean, what are the new trends that are coming? Where do you think it goes next? Video is another one, right?
Yeah, video absolutely has its use cases. You look at during COVID as a prime example, your electrical retailers adopted video very heavily to showcase product, so you could make the right decision as a consumer. That is, I wouldn't say it's mainstream, but it's certainly not bleeding edge anymore. You can bring that channel in very easily. But I think the hot topic is artificial intelligence. It's AI, and there you've got immediately two mainstream flavors of that. You've got conversational AI, so intelligence built upon a very narrow set of information that's provided by the client in terms of knowledge base, articles, all that sort of stuff. And then you've got generative AI, which is the ChatGPT stuff. So that's where it's got a much wider field of data to make its responses from. And my view, and it's a personal view, are we ready for that larger ChatGPT type application? Potentially not. It will really depend upon the massive amount of data set available to it, how much of it is correct, how much of it isn't, how does it build its response from so much data. Whereas conversational AI, which is still being adopted, you can probably make more accurate. You just have to keep it more updated as you go through as an organization. But certainly AI is going to touch everything. This is not just about front-end web chat. This is about every step of that customer journey can be touched by AI. Some
of the discussion around AI, I suppose chatbots, has been like, how do you take cost out? So are you hearing, is it a cost piece or is it actually a helping customer experience piece? Because you can look at both of them, right? So is it just we're going to reduce the number of agents, or do you think it's actually there's benefits that can be generated from a customer experience point of view? If I put my consumer duty hat on particularly.
Yeah, right now the conversations we're having is how does it enhance the customer journey? So allowing service outside of main opening hours of contact center, absolutely AI has a play. Helping an agent with the next best steps, helping the agent with suggested responses and speeding up that transaction time so you as a consumer or as a business entity gets your response quickly and efficiently is where I think most of the conversations are right now. Replacing of live agents, live empathetic agents? No, I don't think so. Not yet.
So it did feel like through the pandemic, it was best described to me as almost like we didn't have the habits of using digital and digital self-serve, and we got into the habit of it, and it wasn't that scary, right? So do you think we're in that same kind of spot in terms of like with AI and some of these large language models, but also the other types of machine learning as well?
I think we're just starting on that understanding of how it's going to affect our lives. Okay. the great cases around chat GPT writing school kids essays is a really interesting use case, if you want to call it that. But in our world of CX and customer contact, we're just starting on that journey. But if it's implemented the right way, so automate where it makes sense, always have human contact as the backup or as a necessary step and remove the automation. As long as you've got that as the mindset, I think the adoption will be really good, because we're all used to using digital services. Yeah. You're absolutely right. We're all used to using Messenger. We're all used to we've used press 1 for this, 2 for that for years. We've all inputted our account numbers in banking systems or an identifier for a collections account. Everybody's done that. So to a degree, we're used to self-service, but automate where it makes sense, use the human effect to really deliver a personalized journey, I think.
How much do you think consumers really want to talk to people versus being able to do things almost like through self-serve versus not? And I know it depends probably on the situation to a certain extent, but if I go back 10 years, we were always like, oh, you've got to talk with people, or even there's some banks you phone up and you're still going through IVRs, right? You're still going through IVRs, and for me, I don't want to do that. I'd just much rather do it on the website, as an example. But I remember the conversations we used to have about how wonderful the IVR was in terms of reducing time and those kind of things. But actually, it was actually just frustrating me to a certain extent. Is that our psychology's changed, or do you think just the technology's changed, or are we interacting with things differently than we used to?
We're interacting differently. Yeah. Ultimately, the goal of any customer experience journey is first call resolution. We talk about it all the time. It's a key metric within the contact center world. And that is driven by not just the cost of delivering the service, but actually from the consumer, from the business's point of view. We all want the information when we want the information, and we want it as quickly as we can. So we are, as a population, happy to self-serve when it suits us, as long as there's always that backup of speaking to a human if they're available. But you look at, there are, we talk about banks that use IVRs. You bring that back into the financial world with collections. Does somebody that owes money really want to speak to a live person? Do you know what? Maybe not. They need to be offered the option. And if that speeds up the debt recovery period, then that has to be the right thing to do. If the end result is that, if it makes somebody more comfortable to deal with AI or to deal with a self-service application, then it should be made available. And if in the psyche of some people, if they're feeling bad about money they owe or they can't pay, are they really going to take a phone call from a contact center? I doubt it. I really doubt it.
Yeah. Some people absolutely don't, and they'd rather do it because they're embarrassed around it. Yeah. Some people do need the support, and you've got to make sure that people are there to help them when they need it.
Yep.
The other thing, and just going back to large language models, is the ability to be able to maybe ask the questions, the embarrassing questions that you don't want to ask a human. So I might not want to ask you like the really sort of like what I would feel would be like really basic questions, but I will ask those to the computer maybe, because I know that there's no embarrassment factor there. So I think there's those kind of spaces for it, but it doesn't mean to say I don't want to talk with someone. I probably want to talk with someone when I'm better educated, I think.
Again, that fits perfectly within a customer journey. When you get into that, but the more data we have on a collections case, actually, the more intelligent all of it becomes in the process of every single transaction. So the AI becomes more intelligent because it's got better data set to work from. And when it ends up with a human agent, actually, you're identifying what type of person you're talking to. You've immediately got view of all the previous transactions they've had. You've got the dates and times on the transactions. There's patterns that can be seen and identified by AI around, actually, this is a really good time to talk about, can you make another payment? Or actually, this is the wrong time to talk about that. This is the time to talk about support. How you doing? How's things going? What's the position? Rather than going straight to a financial transaction. But this is where it all blends together. But it still comes back to a personalized journey to have the best effect.
And what about the role of things like omnichannel? So omnichannel's obviously talked about in terms of you start on one channel, then you go to another channel, and you know where all of that is.
Yep.
And what's happened before. That seemed like that was a challenge even a couple of years ago. It feels like we've made great progress around that. Is that still a theme?
The education with organisations around become channel-less, which is the omnichannel message. So everything comes in to the same platform, gets access to the same data set, everything is connected, and you as an organization can set how each of those transactions route and what's the best thing to do is certainly better than siloed communication. Because how can you create a personalized journey or an effective automated journey when your channels are siloed, when your data sets are potentially completely separate, your administration is completely separate? And that's the underpinning philosophy of omnichannel, is control and a joined up experience.
And I suppose how much of it is around the technology, and except you're a technology company, how much of it is around the technology, but actually how much of it is actually now about the data? So no matter what the channel is, it's around what data does that give me, what does that tell me about the customer, what does it mean in terms of routing? And the technology is a way of getting the data, I accept that, but because before we were always like, I've got to have this technology, versus should we be thinking about I've got to have this data, and what's the technology, the enablement to get me that data?
Yeah. Without the data set, you could have the best contact center system in the world, but it would still potentially fail on your organizational outcomes. So that connection between the customer experience engine and the data set is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. And we all know if the data set is a load of rubbish, your input and your output is rubbish.
Yeah.
But having the two talk together seamlessly is absolutely paramount.
And what about for clients who've got legacy systems? They might have on-prem systems, all of those kind of things. They have this mishmash of systems, which you see when particularly companies have been very successful and they've been here a long time. What's your advice to them in terms of the changeover and like how to go about that? Because it can be a big lift for people, which is probably part of the reason why they've not changed already if they haven't.
Yeah, and this is all about risk. So there's financial considerations when making a technology procurement. Am I still in contract? How much have I got embedded into that asset? Can I afford to move to something else? Completely get that. That's the way any organizational decision works. But specifically for customer experience and collections, it's about risk. It's about risk of transition from what you know and have accepted is working here, may have challenges, to implementing something new that overcomes those challenges and delivers additional outcome. But what's the risk in that transition? And I'd suggest it's not just about the technology. I suggest it's about the experience of the organization you're making that procurement from. So whether that's a vendor, whether that's a systems integrator, a service provider, a value-added reseller, a partner of that vendor, I think that choice is as important as the technology. Because if you're working with an organization that doesn't get what your outcomes will need to be, then your project will fail.
You talk about vendors there, and I suppose the experience of the vendors, but then also with APIs, I suppose people are now starting to talk to each other much more. So, for example, when you mentioned Salesforce earlier, I know you guys have got a relationship with them. It's like this interconnection of lots of different vendors seems to be much more common. Is that sort of like almost like taking the best of each of them? Is that something that is an opportunity? And why is that sort of taking off, I suppose?
So you've answered your question there about how different departments work across an organization. So you might have a sales organization in a business that operates a one line of business application. You've got the collections department that will work within collection software. You've got a service department, let's say for a housing association, that will have a specific vertical software package that suits their environment. But one contact center platform. So the contact center platform has to be able, through APIs, to integrate each application to deliver the right set of information to an agent, to deliver the right intelligence around routing, to deliver the right intelligence around qualification of who's contacting you, how they're contacting you, what's their history. So it's got to be API driven. It's got to be open and easy to integrate. We have a public sector customer that has 11 line of business applications integrated into a single platform, because of the complexity of the roles within their business.
And where do you think that will evolve to? I'm thinking almost like if you look at, say, Apple products, or if you look at Microsoft products, where we have lots of different products, but they do start to talk to each other. And both of those companies invested a huge amount of money, and Google's the same, around making sure they can talk to each other. So you can copy and paste from a spreadsheet into a word processing application, as an example, and that becomes easy and seamless to do. It feels like with APIs and the integration across platforms on the business side, it's starting to move that way, although maybe not as fast. Do you think we'll get there there where it's going to be completely seamless, and you almost like you want to press a button, you need a collection system, or you need collections functionality, or you need contact center functionality, and almost like click the app button and then it installs automatically.
Yeah, I think that will be driven by what you'll term the hyperscalers. So your Amazons, your Microsofts, your Googles, where organizations will make a decision on a hyperscaler. And then any other applications, line of business, contact center, CX will have to be aligned and certified and integrated with that hyperscaler. So for example, you'll find organizations that have chosen Google, so they will only procure applications and technology that is already pre-integrated and certified with Google. And that's where you'll get that inter-adoption of application, that copy and paste.
So you have almost like the mothership, or the big software, and then you have the ecosystem that then basically sits within that.
Definitely, and you've only got a Google IT ecosystems, and you can see all of that developing. It's so important that if a customer is making a decision, that they're making that decision in an open ecosystem environment. Because we all have to support, all vendors have to support customer choice. It's very rare, for example, that we come across an opportunity that is just contact center. Okay, there's normally a telephony unified communications element. There might be a CRM element. There might be another application that's part of the procurement. And you've got to be able to integrate to whatever the customer chooses on those other procurements. So that ecosystem play is really important. And the more open you are to those integrations, I think the better positioned you'll be, certainly within hyperscalers.
Yeah, and if you look at the hyperscalers sitting at the top, which ones do you think will come out at the end of the day as being like the ones to watch?
I think it'd be the three that I mentioned. I think it'd be Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are certainly, and they all have fantastic ecosystem plays, all of them, because they've recognised that they have to support customer choice, but equally, if you've got an open ecosystem and more applications in your ecosystem, then more customers are likely to procure the mothership.
Yeah. So despite the implementation of ChatGPT and all the talk there is around the demise of Google as an example, then it's probably a little bit premature, I would think, because they're so embedded right at the top. So they're creating the ecosystem, so to a certain extent.
Very, very much so. Very much so. And we come across customers that want to procure everything through Amazon Marketplace. So if you're not on Amazon Marketplace, you're not going to reach that customer. Yeah. You'll immediately be turfed out the sales cycle. So that gives you an idea of the power of an ecosystem.
Yeah, and I suppose as a software vendor, you can be part of multiple ecosystems. That's slightly different, but you can do that. But there's a limit to how many you can do, isn't there? You can't be 50, but it can probably be 5.
No, we take what I think is a slightly different approach to most vendors in our space. So we're very, very good at in-project integration. So if we're not part of, I don't know, ABC CRM's ecosystem, because we've never integrated before, we'll stand by our API set and go, don't worry about it, Mr. Customer. If that's your CRM and we're your chosen CX partner, we'll do the integration as part of the project through our professional services leads. And we're very good at that. But then you still want to be present in the core ecosystems that are really important to you. So for us, Salesforce, Pega, we're looking at Microsoft. Those are ecosystems we want to be in because they're the most common people we see in our target market.
Yeah.
But you can't be in everything.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's changing and how it's subtly changing as well. It's like the monolithic systems of the past seem to be sort of like disappearing and becoming this sort of like ecosystem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it feels like that's changing very fast.
Yeah.
So, well, Rob, thanks very much for making the time. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear a bit about what the future of CCaaS is and where things are going. It feels like it's moved an awfully long way very fast. I'm not sure that the speed is actually slowing down at all, actually.
No.
So I appreciate you making the time. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time, Chris. You take care.
Thanks.
Cheers.